George Clooney. Just hearing his name once was enough to conjure up images of class, charm, and the last true gentleman of Hollywood. For millions around the world, he wasn't only an actor. They saw in him a symbol of effortless elegance, a silver-haired heartthrob who seemed to defy time itself. His mere presence on screen could light up a room, leaving audiences captivated, enchanted, and convinced that here was a man who had it all. From the role of Dr. Doug Ross in ER, which made him a household name, to his unforgettable film performances that defined an era, Clooney became more than a star. He was the very standard of what it meant to be suave, witty, and magnetic. His smile seemed unshakable, his charisma untouchable, and his life enviable. Red carpets, private jets, and the world's applause, all of it seemed to confirm the picture of a man who lived above pain, above struggle, above heartbreak. But what if that wasn't the full story? What if behind the tuxedos and the headlines, there lived another George Clooney, the one the cameras rarely showed, a man carrying invisible scars, quietly fighting through loneliness, physical agony, and personal heartbreaks that fame and fortune could never protect him from. Because while the world adored the Hollywood icon, behind the spotlight stood a boy, a man, a human being. One who knew pain far more intimately than most ever realized. Long before the Oscars, the billion-dollar deals, and the endless charm, George Clooney was just a boy growing up in Kentucky. Born on May 6, 1961, to Nina Bruce, a former beauty queen and city councilwoman, and Nick Clooney, a charismatic television host and journalist, it seemed George was destined for the spotlight. His family roots were rich with talent. His aunt was the legendary singer and actress Rosemary Clooney, and, through distant lineage, even Abraham Lincoln was part of his family tree. From the outside, it looked like George had been given every advantage: a loving home, a vibrant heritage, and a promising future. But appearances can deceive. Pain doesn't always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it arrives quietly, changing a life before you can even understand what's happening. For George, that storm struck when he was just 13 years old. One day, out of nowhere, his young face betrayed him. A rare neurological disorder, Bell's palsy, swept across the left side of his face. In an instant, his smile was frozen. One eye wouldn't close, and half of his mouth refused to move. For nearly 9 months, this paralysis remained. And for a boy entering adolescence, a time when self-image means everything, it was devastating. George later downplayed it in interviews with a smile, telling Larry King, "It goes away. Takes about 9 months, but it clears up." Yet, inside, the memory of those days never left him. Back then, he was just a 7th grader, avoiding mirrors, dreading school, and enduring the cruelty of classmates who didn't understand. Some teased, others stared, and each day became a gauntlet of shame and fear. But here's where Clooney revealed something extraordinary. In the midst of humiliation, he discovered a strange kind of power, humor. If he could make people laugh first before they mocked him, he could control the room. Comedy wasn't just an escape, it became his armor. Clooney turned his frozen face into a joke before anyone else could. It wasn't laughter for joy, it was laughter for survival. This coping mechanism would shape the man he became. That easygoing, magnetic Clooney charm the world would later fall in love with? It was born in those dark middle school days. Behind the wit, behind the smile, was a boy who learned early to mask pain with charisma, and while the paralysis eventually healed, the echo of those months, the fear of ridicule, the longing to be normal, stayed with him forever. As the years went on, George pushed himself forward. He dove into sports, basketball, baseball, anything that proved he was strong, capable, and more than the boy who once had a frozen face. In fact, in 1977, he even tried out for the Cincinnati Reds baseball team, He didn't make it, cut in the very first round, another silent wound, but once again he laughed it off, buried the sting, and kept moving. This was the beginning of a pattern that defined his life: resilience forged in humiliation, charm sharpened in pain, and a relentless ability to survive disappointment without showing bitterness. Before the world knew his name, before George Clooney became synonymous with charisma and silver screen stardom, he was just another anonymous face in the shadows of Hollywood. A young man with a famous last name but no guarantee of success. The road to stardom was anything but glamorous. Clooney's early years in the industry were filled with forgettable guest spots, failed pilots, and endless auditions that went nowhere. From his first minor role in the 1978 miniseries Centennial to fleeting appearances on shows like The Facts of Life, Baby Talk, and Bodies of Evidence, he was far from the leading man he would one day become. Every small role seemed to end in disappointment. Every opportunity felt like another door closing. There were moments so bleak that he relied on friends for shelter, sometimes even sleeping in closets just to have a roof over his head. Hollywood didn't roll out the red carpet for George Clooney. If anything, it slammed doors in his face again and again. But here's the part that defined him. Clooney wasn't a prodigy, but he was persistent. He didn't quit. He carried rejection in one hand and determination in the other. One weary footstep at a time, he forced Hollywood to notice him. And then, in 1994, came the role that would change everything. Clooney was cast as Dr. Doug Ross in the NBC medical drama ER. Suddenly, all the years of obscurity vanished overnight. The suave, emotionally complex pediatrician wasn't just another character. He became a cultural phenomenon. Audiences adored him. Women swooned. Men admired him. And for the first time, George Clooney wasn't just surviving Hollywood, he was Jalise. He was defining it. In later interviews, Clooney admitted, "That show saved me. I was broke. I was almost out of chances. ER gave me everything." But television was just the beginning. Clooney used his newfound fame to leap into film with bold choices. Some were hits, like From Dusk Till Dawn, 1996, and Out of Sight, 1998. Some were missteps, like the infamous Batman and Robin, 1997, which he later called a waste of money. But every role, whether praised or criticized, was a stepping stone. Clooney was learning, adapting, sharpening his instincts. By 2001, he stepped into the role that seemed almost tailor-made for him. Danny Ocean in Ocean's 11. Cool, sophisticated, effortlessly charming, Clooney and Ocean were one and the same. The film became a massive hit, spawning sequels and firmly cementing Clooney as one of Hollywood's elite. But George Clooney wasn't content with being just another handsome movie star. He wanted more. He began chasing stories with weight and meaning. Films like Syriana, 2005, Michael Clayton, 2007, and Good Night and Good Luck, 2005. Roles and projects that didn't just entertain but challenged audiences, sparked conversations, and left a mark. For these, Clooney earned more than applause. He won Academy Awards, Golden Globes, and the respect of an industry that once overlooked him. He became not just a star, but a storyteller, a man with vision, voice, and substance. Yet behind every red carpet, behind every standing ovation, a different story was unfolding. Because while the world saw triumph, Clooney was about to face one of the darkest, most agonizing battles of his entire life. By the mid-2000s, George Clooney seemed untouchable. He was at the height of his career, acclaimed actor, admired director, Hollywood's most beloved leading man. But just as the spotlight burned its brightest, life struck him with a blow so severe it nearly destroyed him. In 2005, Clooney was filming Syriana, a politically charged thriller that would later win him an Academy Award. During one particularly intense scene, he was strapped to a chair and violently thrown backward. It seemed like just another stunt, But in that moment, something went catastrophically wrong. The force of the impact tore his dura, the delicate membrane surrounding his spinal cord. Spinal fluid began leaking into his system. At first, he thought it was a typical injury, something he could shake off, but soon he was plunged into a world of agony most people can hardly imagine. The pain was relentless, excruciating, unending. Clooney later confessed that the migraines were so intense, the dizziness so crippling, that he actually contemplated ending his life. "You start to think, I can't exist like this," he admitted in a haunting interview. For a man who had always carried himself with confidence and composure, on screen as a doctor, a hero, a leader, being reduced to lying in a hospital bed, unable to move without searing pain, was both humiliating and terrifying. "I was lying there with an IV in my arm, unable to move, and I thought, is this how it ends?" The cruelest part? From the outside, he looked the same, still handsome, still the suave Hollywood star. But inside, his body screamed in betrayal. The world couldn't see his suffering. And when doctors failed to diagnose the problem correctly, he was left drifting in uncertainty, enduring endless treatments with no relief. Finally, after grueling months, the truth was discovered: a severe spinal fluid leak. Surgery followed. Recovery was long, slow, and agonizing. Clooney described it as being trapped inside a body he could no longer trust. Every step, every movement came with fear. And yet, from this abyss, George Clooney found something remarkable. Through the pain, through the despair, he began to shift his perspective. He leaned into humanitarian work, poured himself into causes beyond Hollywood, and found healing in helping others. He came to see suffering as a great equalizer. "Success doesn't protect you from pain," he said. "Pain is the one thing we all share." Clooney survived not just through medicine, but through grit, patience, and an unwavering resolve to keep going. He emerged scarred, yes, but also softened, more grounded, more deeply human. He showed the world that even icons can break, and that true strength isn't about never falling, but about rising again when life shatters you. But physical pain wasn't the only wound Clooney carried. In the years ahead, another battle would prove just as devastating, one fought not in hospitals or movie sets, but in the fragile arena of the heart. For all his charm, success, and magnetic presence, George Clooney's most painful wounds were not inflicted by Hollywood or even by his near-fatal injury. They came from something far more intimate: love. Back in 1984, long before ER or Ocean's 11 turned him into a household name, Clooney met actress Talia Balsam. She was confident, talented, and came from a well-known Hollywood family. Their chemistry was instant, and within just a few years, they tied the knot. In 1989, swept up in youthful passion, they married in Las Vegas, believing their love could withstand anything. But reality soon shattered that illusion. Clooney's career was just beginning to gather momentum, and he threw himself entirely into auditions, networking, and building his reputation. Talia, however, longed for stability, for a grounded family life, a life Clooney wasn't ready to give. He admitted later that ambition consumed him. He was emotionally distant, often physically absent, and the marriage quickly grew strained. The stress of trying to balance a fragile marriage with an all-consuming career took its toll on Clooney's health. He suffered from serious stomach ulcers, a physical manifestation of the turmoil within. "I was in constant pain," he once recalled, "and I didn't even realize how much of it came from the pressure I was under." By 1993, the marriage collapsed. The divorce papers were signed, and Clooney, just a few years into his Hollywood rise, was left with emotional scars that would linger for decades. He never blamed Talia. In fact, he openly admitted the fault was his. I wasn't good at it. I wasn't someone who should have been married at that point. But the damage was done. The end of his marriage left Clooney with a belief that perhaps he simply wasn't built for commitment. For more than 2 decades after, he swore off marriage entirely. He became Hollywood's most famous bachelor, the man who had everything: fame, fortune, good looks, yet carried a quiet, haunting loneliness. The world saw the glamorous side: Clooney on red carpets, Clooney on yachts, Clooney dating stunning women like British model Lisa Snowden, Italian actress Elisabetta Canales, and WWE star Stacy Keibler. Headlines painted him as the ultimate playboy. But behind closed doors, reality was different, despite the parties, the private jets, the admiration of millions. Clooney confessed to moments of crushing solitude. "There are nights when the silence is deafening," he admitted. Success filled his bank account, but not the emptiness in his heart. He laughed the loudest at parties, but often went home alone to face the quiet. This was Clooney's cruel irony. The freer he became, the lonelier he felt. He told the world that marriage and fatherhood weren't for him, and everyone believed it. But in truth, that conviction came less from certainty and more from heartbreak. Love had once broken him so deeply that he swore never to risk it again. For 2 long decades, George Clooney wandered through relationships, through fame, through glittering events, carrying the weight of a question he could never answer. Was true love ever meant for him? And then, when he least expected it, an encounter at his villa in Italy would change everything. After more than 20 years of swearing he would never marry again, of convincing himself that love was not his destiny, George Clooney's life took an extraordinary turn in 2013. At his beloved villa on Lake Como, Italy, a place he had often retreated to for solitude and escape, a mutual friend brought along a guest who would forever alter the course of his story. Her name was Amal Alamuddin. She wasn't from Hollywood. She didn't care about celebrity or glamour. Amal was a brilliant human rights lawyer, fluent in multiple languages, internationally respected, and driven by a fierce passion for justice. To Clooney, who had spent decades dazzling the world with charm, Amal was unlike anyone he had ever met. She wasn't impressed by George Clooney, the movie star, and that, more than anything, captivated him. That first evening, she spoke with conviction about war crimes, human rights, and the pursuit of justice for those who had no voice. Clooney, usually quick with a joke or a witty remark, found himself speechless. In later interviews, he admitted, "I didn't realize how unfulfilling my life was until I met Amal." What began as casual conversations soon grew into something deeper. They exchanged emails, thoughtful, witty, and often playful. George Clooney, Hollywood's eternal bachelor, suddenly found himself checking his inbox with the eagerness of a teenager. Their bond wasn't built on red carpets or champagne dinners. It was built on late-night reflections, shared ideals, and emotional honesty. Within months, Clooney knew. For the first time in decades, he could see a future that wasn't defined by solitude. He went out and bought a ring, not for show, not for publicity, but because he couldn't imagine life without her. One evening at home, in a moment of quiet vulnerability, George Clooney, the man who had vowed never to marry again, got down on one knee. For 20 agonizing minutes, Amal was stunned into silence. He even joked later that he considered blowing out the candle on the table if she said no. But at last, she said yes. And in that single word, everything Clooney thought he knew about love unraveled. For George, it wasn't just a proposal. It was a rebirth. After years of loneliness and guarded walls, he chose vulnerability. He chose hope. He chose forever. Little did the world know that private proposal would lead to one of the most elegant and celebrated weddings of the decade. A union, not of spectacle, but of true love rediscovered. On September 27, 2014, Venice, the city of canals, romance, and timeless elegance, paused for a moment as George Clooney prepared to do what he once swore he would never do again: marry. The venue was the Ammon Canal Grande, a majestic 16th-century Venetian palace that whispered history from its marble walls and chandeliers. Gondolas glided quietly across moonlit waters, carrying guests through narrow canals as though the city itself had conspired to create a perfect dream. Amal arrived radiant, wearing a custom Oscar de la Renta gown that floated with both grace and conviction. George, in a Giorgio Armani tuxedo, couldn't hide the awe in his eyes as she approached. For once, the man who had charmed millions appeared overwhelmed, his smile softer, his eyes brighter, his entire being transformed by love. Their guest list was a testament to the worlds they brought together: Hollywood royalty, Matt Damon, Cindy Crawford, Bill Murray, Bono, mingled with diplomats, human rights advocates, and close friends from Amal's legal world. It was a merging of glamour and gravitas, of stardust and substance. But despite the A-list names, the ceremony itself was surprisingly intimate. Officiated by Walter Veltroni, former mayor of Rome and a longtime friend of George, the vows carried no trace of Hollywood performance. There were no tabloid antics, no theatrical displays. Instead, there was stillness, reverence, and the quiet power of two people who had weathered storms and now found harbor in each other. George's voice trembled slightly as he vowed not only to be Amal's partner, but her friend, her family, her safe place. Amal, poised and luminous, spoke words that softened even the hardest hearts in the room. For those who witnessed it, it was less a celebrity wedding and more a sacred reminder that love, in its purest form, remains untouched by fame. Afterward, laughter and joy filled the reception. Guests toasted with vintage Italian wine, dined on world-class cuisine, and danced beneath the glow of chandeliers. Clooney, once the eternal bachelor who had declared he would never marry again, now stood hand in hand with his wife, proving himself wrong in the most beautiful way imaginable. For the world, it was the wedding of the decade. For George, it was something far greater: the day he stopped running from love, the day he finally found peace in the one thing he had always been missing. But marriage was only the beginning. Beyond the candlelight and applause, George and Amal would soon face the realities of building a life together, balancing two powerful careers, navigating distance, and learning what it truly meant to fight for love. When the echoes of applause in Venice faded, George and Amal stepped into something far more challenging than a lavish wedding: real marriage. Unlike the fairy tale image the media painted, their lives were anything but simple. George was still one of the most recognized faces in Hollywood, acting, directing, producing. His work pulled him from one side of the globe to the other. Amal, meanwhile, was in the thick of high-stakes legal battles, representing victims of war crimes, challenging governments, and defending freedom of the press. Her courtroom was the world stage, her opponents some of the most powerful regimes on earth. Distance wasn't metaphorical, it was constant. Months of travel, missed calls, long flights, and nights apart threatened to wedge itself between them. But from the beginning, they had made a pact: never to spend more than a week apart. It wasn't always easy, but they both fought for it. Clooney later said, "We make it work because she's worth it. Every mile, every hour." To honor that promise, Clooney began reshaping his career. He scaled back his directorial projects, became far more selective about his roles, and prioritized time at home. Amal, despite her demanding work, also found ways to keep family at the center. Together, they bought homes not just as luxuries, but as sanctuaries: Lake Como, Los Angeles, Berkshire. Each place was a promise: No matter how far the world pulled them, they would always come back together. Their relationship thrived not just on romance, but on advocacy. George stood proudly beside Amal at human rights summits, while she walked red carpets at his premieres. He often deflected attention in interviews, insisting she's the real star. She, in turn, celebrated his ability to use fame as a platform for justice. Yet, even in love, there were quiet struggles. Amal's work often demanded her presence in distant countries for weeks. George, though surrounded by fame and luxury, admitted to moments of aching loneliness. Still, they both chose faith in what they were building. Their love wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence, about choosing each other again and again, even when life pulled them in opposite directions. By 2024, while George prepared for his Broadway debut in Good Night and Good Luck in New York, Amal remained in Europe with their children. Media outlets buzzed with rumors of separation, even whispers of a $500 million divorce. But both George and Amal were quick to dismiss the gossip. George stated simply, "We still love and respect each other. Nothing has changed." Their story was never meant to be a Hollywood fairy tale. It was something richer. Two people meeting later in life, both marked by past scars, both carrying immense responsibilities, yet both choosing, day after day, to stand together. And soon, life would test them in an even deeper way as Clooney stepped into a role he once swore he would never play: fatherhood. For decades, George Clooney had been Hollywood's most famous bachelor. He said it countless times. Marriage wasn't for him, children weren't in his plans. But in June 2017, at the age of 56, everything changed. George and Amal welcomed twins, Ella and Alexander, into the world. The man who once declared fatherhood wasn't his destiny now found himself holding two tiny souls that redefined his entire existence. "I didn't see myself as a father," Clooney admitted. "It wasn't that I didn't like kids. I just never imagined it for me." But the moment he saw his children, the world he thought he knew collapsed into something deeper, softer, infinitely more meaningful. Suddenly, the Hollywood icon traded late-night premieres for late-night feedings, red carpets for diaper duty, and film sets for bedtime stories. Friends noticed the shift immediately. Clooney, once driven by career above all, began turning down major projects just to be home. His mornings were no longer about scripts or meetings, but pancakes with Ella and bike rides with Alexander. The transformation humbled him. He often joked about being the old dad at preschool events, quipping on a late-night show, "I may look like the grandpa in the room, but I'm not dead. My kids keep me young in ways I never thought possible." Beneath the humor, though, was a profound pride, a vulnerability that revealed just how much fatherhood had touched him. Of course, parenting came with fears. When Alexander was diagnosed with asthma, George and Amal went into protective overdrive, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. They shut themselves off from nearly all outside contact, cooking, cleaning, and playing board games at home, creating forts out of couch pillows and cherishing the smallest, simplest rituals. Clooney later said, "You stop thinking about yourself. Every decision becomes about them. It's terrifying, and the most beautiful thing." George and Amal made a conscious choice to raise their children with privacy and simplicity. They refused offers for magazine covers, avoided exposing them to the digital world, and guarded their childhood fiercely. "I don't want my kids growing up thinking money is the goal," Clooney once explained. "I want them to inherit values, not just wealth." And then came the surprises only children can bring. At one point, Clooney revealed, with both pride and amusement, that the twins spoke fluent Italian, a language neither he nor Amal spoke. "They conspire against us in Italian," he laughed. For George Clooney, fatherhood wasn't just another chapter in his story. It became the heart of his legacy, not written in box office numbers or golden statues, but in giggles, lullabies, and quiet evenings by the fire. In his own words, "I thought I had everything, but playing with my kids every morning, that's the best part of my life." Still, even as family became his anchor, Clooney couldn't escape the shadows of age and pain. His body carried the scars of the past, and his career, though thriving, took on new meaning. Today, at 64, George Clooney is no longer the man chasing Hollywood's spotlight. The once most sought-after bachelor of the silver screen now chooses mornings filled with pancakes, bike rides by Lake Como, and evenings of laughter with the family who mean more to him than any red carpet ever could. Most days, George and Amal live at Villa Oleandra, their $100 million sanctuary on Lake Como. This isn't just a luxury estate. It's where he first met Amal back in 2013, and it remains the heart of their family life. With its private dock, gardens, wine cellar, and even a chef's kitchen where Clooney cooks for his children, it has become his little paradise. During the school year, they often move to their 17th-century Berkshire mansion in England, complete with tennis courts and lush gardens, or retreat quietly to their Los Angeles home. But Clooney insists home is not about walls or square footage. It's wherever Amal, Ella, and Alexander are. Yet even in this quieter life, Clooney carries a burden. The spinal injury from Syriana never fully healed. Chronic pain lingers, forcing him to avoid high-impact activities and constant travel. There were days, he admitted, when the agony once pushed him to the brink of despair. But now he embraces a gentler rhythm. Mediterranean-style meals prepared with Amal's care, bike rides on winding Italian roads, and long afternoons reading or writing scripts. "I don't go to the gym," he once joked. "I work out by loving life slowly." Professionally, Clooney hasn't retired. He's simply more selective. In 2022, he reunited with Julia Roberts for Ticket to Paradise, delighting audiences with his familiar charm. In 2023, he directed The Boys in the Boat, a story about resilience during the Great Depression. Through his company, Smokehouse Pictures, he continues producing films that carry meaning rather than spectacle. He avoids social media, rarely gives interviews, and almost never appears in gossip headlines. His public presence now focuses on causes that matter: human rights, press freedom, global justice, often standing at Amal's side. Financially, he remains one of Hollywood's wealthiest stars, worth over $500 million. A significant portion came from the billion-dollar sale of his Casamigos tequila company. But what defines him now isn't what he has kept. It's what he has given. Through the Clooney Foundation for Justice, he and Amal have poured millions into rebuilding schools in war zones, supporting journalists, and defending victims of political oppression. Clooney has spoken at the United Nations, condemning dictatorships and calling for global accountability. He has already written his will, ensuring not just his family, but humanitarian causes will inherit his legacy. "I don't want my kids growing up thinking money is the goal. I want them to inherit values, not just wealth." At 64, the man once known as Hollywood's eternal bachelor is now a husband, a father, a humanitarian, and a thinker. The red carpets have dimmed, but the light within him burns brighter than ever. Fame made him an icon, but it is love, integrity, and purpose that made him whole. His story is no longer about Hollywood glamour. It is about resilience born from pain, hope rediscovered in love, and the legacy of a man who turned heartbreak into humanity. George Clooney's journey is more than the tale of a Hollywood star. It is the story of a man who has lived through humiliation, heartbreak, crushing pain, dazzling triumphs, and, at last, quiet redemption. From the seventh-grade boy frozen by Bell's palsy, mocked for something he could not control, to the struggling actor sleeping in friends' closets, ignored by the very industry that would later worship him. From the husband whose first marriage collapsed under the weight of ambition, leaving him convinced that love wasn't meant for him. To the global icon brought to his knees by a spinal injury so unbearable he questioned if life was worth living. Every wound, every scar, every lonely night shaped him, and yet he never stopped moving forward. Today, Clooney is no longer just the suave leading man with a tuxedo smile. He is a father memorizing bedtime stories, a husband who still looks at a mall with awe, a humanitarian standing at the front lines of justice. The man who once lived for applause now lives for purpose. What makes his story so powerful is not the glamour, but the transformation. Clooney turned pain into empathy, loneliness into love, fame into a platform for justice. He proved that true greatness is not about never breaking. It's about breaking and still choosing to rise again. At 64, George Clooney is not fading. He is flourishing, quietly, intentionally, beautifully. The spotlight that once defined him now shines on something greater, a legacy of integrity, compassion, and the reminder that even legends are human. And perhaps that is his greatest gift to us all. Not the films, not the awards, not the headlines, but the simple truth that no matter how much the world applauds you, it is love, family, and purpose that matter most. So the next time you see George Clooney, whether on screen, in a rare interview, or walking alongside a mall at a human rights summit, remember, you are not just looking at a movie star. You are looking at a survivor, a father, a husband, a man who chose vulnerability over fear, and who turned his greatest tragedies into a life of meaning. And maybe that's the real lesson of George Clooney's life, that no matter how much pain we carry, no matter how many times we fall, there is always hope, there is always love, and there is always a chance to rise again, stronger, softer, and more human than before.